And off we go. Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Joe Hawkins. I'm the Director of Parent and Family Programs. We're excited to have you all here today. And I'm very quickly going to turn it over to our presenters. I'll let you introduce yourselves and the content, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming today to learn about our room selection process for rising second-year students. So current first-year students thinking about where they're going to live for next year. My name is Sarah Meany, and I am the Associate Director for Residential Academic Initiatives in the Office of Residence Life.
And hello, everyone. I'm Brian Woodruff, and I'm the Director of Housing and Operational Services, which is part of the Campus Services Center. So just a little bit today about the things we're going to be covering. These are all related to the second-year room selection process. So we'll go over the residency requirement reminder. We'll talk about student-created community options. We'll also go into some details about sorority corridors, the second-year honors communities, scholar leaders, as well as our general room selection process, and talk about just some information about being an RA, as well as plenty of time for questions that you might have as well. So to start things off, we do have a 2-year requirement for students at Miami to live on campus. And so here at Miami, we do highly value that on-campus residential experience. So we do require that all first-year and second-year students live on campus. We have a few exemptions to that. Those would be anyone who is 21 years or older before the first day of class, anyone who has attended college full-time for 2 years or more. Those credits have to be after high school, or someone who's commuting from home. So those are the 3 exemptions we would have. So a small number of students do request some of those each year, so we'd like to make you aware of those. Students who do want to request that exemption would need to go through and fill out a second-year exemption form that can be found on our website. And that has to be done before the start of each school year. Rising second-year men who are members of a approved fraternity can also apply to live in their off-campus fraternity house. Those fraternity exemptions are coordinated through the Cliff Alexander Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life. And there's a process for that for those who are joining, and they're in a chapter that's approved to have an exemption, and then the individual members are approved. So that's all information that the Cliff Alexander office will provide. So be sure that if your student is participating in that process, that they're paying attention to any of those messages and communications. And then just one last reminder on this is for your student not to sign a housing contract if they plan to apply for an exemption. Students would not be eligible to file for an exemption if they signed a contract for the year, for that academic year. So we do require and guarantee housing for second-year students. So that means we'll have a space for them. So if they're uncertain of exactly what they'll be doing, they should just wait to do room selection until their exemption status is confirmed. So with all that out of the way, that's a small number. We like to just get that out of the way there for anyone who might be thinking about that or have questions about that exemption process. But with that, we want to jump right into the variety of options that your students have for actually living on campus.
Yeah, so one of the initiatives through the Office of Residence Life is student-created communities. So this is where first-year students will come together and form a community around a theme. And it really enhances their second year of living experience. So, and that theme can really be anything. So it can be a common interest. I think we have an evening hiking group this year that might be around an academic interest, like a major, but it can really be whatever the students want. Sometimes they extend their first year living learning community. So we have Celebrate the Arts as a first year only living learning community. And people are like, I love this. I want to keep going. I love all these people. And they make Celebrating the Arts 2.0. So that's a possibility. And then sometimes they form after groups that are already existing on campus. So our swim and dive team has traditionally created Cheer-a-thon. So they kind of pass that knowledge down to the first year students. We also have a thriving crew community that's come together almost every year. So there are a lot of different ways that students can form groups together. For student created communities, we look between 8 and 30 students to come together. And then Residence Life provides a little extra support and resources for those students. Some of those being financial resources. So as we look at the kind of the process, the application for a student created community is going to open at the end of November. You can check that. It's all updated and ready to go on the community options page for the Office of Residence Life. And applications are not due until the 12th. So we've got quite a bit of time, but we do run that process in February. So we will hear from all of the groups, we'll review their applications, we'll hear their group presentations, and then we'll tell the groups if they've been approved or denied. Those notifications are sent in early March. And then we pretty much run kind of a mini process just for the students in student created. So we talk about which buildings they're going to go in. They tell us their rosters of who's going to be in their community. And we finalize all of that before second year housing, the general housing process starts. And then we do provide an additional leadership training. So each of the student created communities has two student leaders. And so we bring those students together, talk about kind of how programming works. We talk about the budgets that they have, maybe how to do this. This might be their first opportunity to lead a group. So we walk through all of that for them in April.
Right. So want to talk a little bit about the sorority corridor housing here. So rising second year students who will be members of sororities will live in residence hall corridors with their chapter. So this process happens in mid-spring and it's coordinated together with the Cliff Alexander Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life and Leadership. Sorority corridors are designated within the 5 halls you see on the screen: Hamilton, Minnick, Scott, Richard, and McCracken halls. And each chapter is located within the halls. Those are all determined, those locations, by the sorority leadership. So this process will occur in March, and the students who are participating in it will receive the information in the coming months from the Cliff Alexander office. So that'll be their opportunity to select rooms there within their corridors. Another process we have is the second year honors. And so this is a process for current first year students who live in the honors residential college. They'll have the opportunity to select to stay in the community for their second year. This is an online process in early April for anyone who's interested in it. There's a limited number of spaces available for this, and that's because we do need to hold the rooms in the building for the incoming first year students who will be part of the honors college as well. But we do expect to have a good number of beds available for this. And each year we do this, we've typically had more spaces than what we needed for the second year students. So shouldn't be a problem there, but we are looking forward to allowing this opportunity for anyone to return to that community who's looking forward to. So that process, again, is coming in the spring. That'll be in early April. And look out for information from the Honors College over the coming months with more details about that. An additional process will be the Scholar Leader process. And so students who are part of the Scholar Leader program do have the opportunities to select their rooms in Stoddard and Elliott. This happens in March as well. And more information about the Scholar Leader application process can be found on the web. And there's a link there right here on the screen. And just to let you all know, we do have a listing of any of the links that we've shared in the presentation will actually be on a summary page at the end. So you don't have to worry about writing those down now. You can see those at the end. And so what we've just seen of the student created, the student created, the sorority, the honors, and the Scholar Leader all basically mirror a similar process. The timing is a little differently, but as you can see on the screen here, these are the key steps that each of those processes go through. So for each of them, we've got this same basic process. And so that first step is that the group would begin their housing application. They'll create a roommate group if this desired to do so with typically one other person if they want to do that. Then the second step is that they would be sent a lottery time slot by email. This time slot will tell them the day and time that they'll be able to select the room and complete the housing application. And then beginning at their assigned lottery time, they'll log into the online system and select a room, a meal plan, and complete their housing contract. And so for each of these processes we've covered already, all of this typically occurs usually within a few days of each other. And the more precise details of the exact dates will all be on our website. Typically within the next couple weeks, we'll probably have those finalized. We're still finalizing some of those dates So for the majority of rising second year students who have not participated in one of those earlier processes, the majority will participate in what we call our general room selection process. This takes place in April, and anyone who participated in a previous process, such as the sorority, the student created, etc., they would not need to participate in this as they already have their room finalized. So this process, just like the others, takes place online at your student's online housing account portal. So here you can see on the screen, this is the overall timeline for the general process. As you see, this should look a little familiar from what you've just seen a few seconds ago with that general process that we have for the room selection, kind of the steps you go through. But this is specific to the general process. So if your student is interested in selecting a room with a specific roommate, it is important that they organize that roommate group prior to room selection. So they'll receive information from the Campus Services Center by email, explaining the important dates and times. On Monday, April 3rd, students would have the opportunity to enter that housing system. And that first step is to begin setting up roommate groups if they wish. This is optional, but it is important to do this ahead of time if they have a specific roommate request that they want to have. Doing this ahead of time allows them to easily pick a room together on the room selection day without spending additional time that day trying to confirm and verify a roommate group. So step one is they'll be able to begin that application, pick a roommate group if they'd like to, and then the next step that would occur, so they'll kind of do that. That's all they can do at that point. They'll come to a stop in the process. And then the next step that happens is that on April 14th, they will receive their room selection lottery time slot sent to them by email. Now, this will tell them their exact day and time where they can begin the room selection process. Roommate groups that are set up in advance would receive the same lottery time slot. So we help to make sure that if they're connected already, they'll be able to go into the system at the same time. Room selection at this point is planned for the week of April 17th, as you can see, and students will be assigned time slots throughout the week in order to make sure that the system doesn't slow down. So we basically spread those lottery time slots. We direct the system to spread them out over the 5 days. They're randomly generated, but we can give it that guidance of how to spread them out. We don't want the system to crash on anyone. So on the room selection day, your student will log in and be able to select the room, meal plan, and complete the contract. If they have a roommate group set up, they would assign their roommate to the room at the same time as well when they're in there. Now, we do sometimes get the question, hey, I logged in and I can't pick a room or I can't complete things. If it's before their lottery time slot, that's why. And that's because you can't actually pick the room until your lottery time has opened up. And then you can go in anytime after that has opened up. Depending on the lottery time frame received, a small number of the students may not see any available rooms to select when they do enter the process at their assigned time. If this happens to your student, we just ask that proceed with signing a housing contract, that they select assignment pending in the process. We do expect full occupancy this fall. So that means that during room selection, we expect to have periods of time when there's no open rooms to choose from. This happens pretty much every year. And then during the spring and summer months, we learn of a large number of students who will not be returning to the university housing in the fall. This lets us open up rooms that were previously not shown as available. So if your student is placed on that assignment pending status, don't worry, no need to worry. They'll be able to enter their roommate requests as well as their hall preferences immediately online. And then as spaces do become available in those weeks and months in late spring and early summer, we use those preferences they've entered to assign them to a room. Each year, we're able to assign every returning second year student typically by midsummer for the small number that might end up in this situation. So if that were to be your student, fear not, we do guarantee housing for everyone. And typically, our staff just does an amazing job of getting folks in really where they want to be. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Yeah, so throwing a lot of information at you, but rising first year students also have the opportunity to become resident assistants with the Office of Residence Life. So they have all these cool options. They also have a neat leadership opportunity. So RAs live right on the floor with our students. They are in charge of kind of the community building, the safety, the connection with our residents. They have a pretty big job to fulfill, and the first time they're eligible is when they're second-year students. So this is the first time they can apply for this position. We really want them to promote the pillars of success within the Office of Residence Life, and that's safe and healthy communities. The RAs definitely are part of our persistence and retention in the university. We want them to create diverse and inclusive communities. Hopefully they're extending the learning environment. That's my favorite because I'm in charge of the LLCs. And then it also while easing the transition to adulthood. So RAs are really in charge of a lot of that student experience for our students, for residential students. So if we look at the timeline, RAs, actually the application is available now. So it opened on November 1st. The priority application process will close on January 8th. All the pieces need to be finished. So the application done and the references in order to move forward in the priority process. We'll have an interview week. So every applicant will get one interview with a couple of our staff members. And then notification letters will get sent out in mid-March. So you'll know if you've been offered an RA position and the building that it's in. You have a week to consider that, and then we need those acceptances back on March 20th. So again, this process, like all those kind of other special processes, will take place ahead of the general selection. The good thing about the RA process is that it also aligns with a lot of the other pieces. So we know right, like student created community, RA, scholar leader, it's all kind of happening at the same time. So we know to pull those students out who have been chosen as RAs, so they're not part of the process moving forward. But it's a great opportunity, wonderful student leadership opportunity. We have a lot of second-year students who are like, well, I need to live on campus, so I might as well do this cool thing in the residence hall. So please encourage the students to take a look. That's at our website, the Miami ORL website as well.
All right. Well, I think that is the prepared information that we have to share with everyone. You can see here on the screen some of the key links and websites that we referenced during the presentation. So these would be helpful if you had any of those specific questions. Kind of the overall process of room selection. All that information and dates can be found there on the room selection process on the housing website. Information about RAs and the student created process on the Res Life website, and then as well sorority, honors, and scholar leader. You can see information there about each of those processes and options to look into. So with that, we'd be happy to take questions that you all have, and I think that Joe is helping us to organize some of those. And so let's see here. Here we'll start right off. Question of if second-year students are going to be studying abroad for any point during the school year. And so the great thing about on-campus housing is that our housing contract does allow for students to take a semester away for a particular program. So we allow, if your student is studying abroad, if they're student teaching, doing an internship, whatever that might be, that they need to be away from Oxford campus for a semester, that they can simply fill out a not returning to housing form that's available on our website. Typically, you need to fill that out one semester early for the semester you're going to be gone. So if someone's, for example, studying abroad in fall, then you typically fill out that not returning to housing form in maybe the late spring. And if you're going to be studying abroad in the spring, you'd be filling that out in the late fall. So right now we're getting those forms coming in for students who are studying abroad this coming fall of 23. But all you have to do is fill that form out. In the example of study abroad, we do ask for just a documentation to confirm that you are part of a program, and then we would cancel housing and the meal plan for that semester only. Now, if your plans change and you are going to be here, you would be reassigned back into housing, but as long as you're going to be away, then we will get that taken care of. Just need to fill out that form. And then, again, that's on the within that housing website there that you see on the screen, you can find the link to the forms for that. Question about the fraternity exemptions. Those questions would all need to go through the Cliff Alexander office of Fraternity Life. I'm not exactly sure what their complete timeline is for those applications and notifications and that. I know we typically find out by late March which students have applied and are tentatively approved. So I would say if your students are interested in that, they definitely want to be connecting with the Cliff Alexander office to find out those details. All right, let's see here. Question of if there's a date to withdraw the housing contract if your situation changes. That could be a pretty specific question. So if there's a specific issue or something that someone has, feel free to contact us in the Campus Services Center so we can look into that. Typically, though, you know, I guess if it's a situation where maybe you've got someone lost a job or you know, medical issue and you need to commute from home instead, those are exceptions that could be appealed. But generally speaking, we don't really see much of housing contracts being canceled for rising second year students, again, just due to the requirement. But if you have an extenuating circumstance, those could certainly be considered.
Yeah, and then there's a question around, can you do a student-created community in the Heritage Commons? And that kind of combos with another question around, what is that place that's behind the rec center? That's Heritage Commons. So the 4-person apartment, so each of the apartments have 4 single bedrooms. They share a kitchen and a living space. That's called Heritage Commons, only for second-year students. So yes, you can do a student-created community in Heritage Commons. That is one of the building options. So as students fill out their application, they will be able to select out of, I don't know, maybe 10 halls. That's something that we'll finalize with the Campus Services Office where student-created communities can go. So students will rank where those places are. Heritage Commons is quite popular for all of our student-created communities and all of our students and everyone on campus. They really love that apartment, those apartment buildings. So it is not a guarantee, right? Just because you're student-created community doesn't mean you're guaranteed access and are going to be approved to live in Heritage Commons, because we do have student-created communities kind of nestled all over campus. And then another question, do the same LLCs exist for sophomores? So we have current living learning communities, most of which are only for first-year students. So we have a few, so Sorority obviously is one of them, a scholar leader. We have a socially engaged engineering and computing that is for second-year engineering students. But beyond that, our LLCs really are mostly for first-year students. So if you have students who are really excited about their community this year, encourage them to look at the student-created community to kind of do that, you know, LLC 2.0 in their second year.
All right, so we got a couple questions here, somewhat about the process. Happy to answer these. Question is, do students select their room and building at the room selection time? And that is true. Yes, so that's absolutely. They'll pick their room during that, again, whichever process they're going through at their assigned lottery time slot. That's when they have access to the system then to actually pick their exact room in the building. There's filter options. They can kind of filter by location. Depending upon what the process is, of course. For example, the sorority buildings, they have a very specific area to pick from. For the general process, you'll be able to kind of filter by different buildings on campus and pick your exact room. Unless, of course, you are one of the students that, again, later in the lottery times that may not have an exact room to pick. Those would be the ones, as I explained earlier, would be in the assignment pending temporarily. But aside from that, yes, you absolutely get to pick your space. And then the halls that are available for the process, that's a question as well of which ones will be available. We don't have a hard and fast list for that because they do to some degree change just based on how we need to allocate beds on campus and you know what we're expecting for incoming first year students and returning students and kind of how we need to make sure that we have the right number of beds for all of the students. But typically we have halls at Heritage Commons, Etheridge, Maple Street are usually included. We've got really halls kind of all around campus in a variety of areas. So Definitely no shortage there, but we don't exactly have a list of exact locations just at this point. Do you have a specific question here about if you would like to live in a triple in a particular building? That will be part of the room selection process. So if you were interested in that, in a triple, if you had a group of 3 you want to live with, you'd want to make sure you get that roommate group of 3 set up ahead of time. So that's that important step of when the application opens, before your lottery time slot, by the open of the application, that you go in, get that roommate group set up. And that way, when your room selection time slot comes, then you can go in, and if there's a triple room available, you'd be able to assign all 3 roommates there to that space. So that would really depend on whether or not there was a triple available. But again, if there was, you could absolutely choose from that. And this would be true for double rooms, for triple rooms, for really any kind of room. If you have a roommate group set up with a particular number of friends, and then there aren't enough spaces in a whole room to accommodate that. So for example, if you've got a group of 3 set up and there's no triple rooms available, or maybe you come to a point to where some individual students have picked spaces in double rooms and there's not a whole open double, but you have a group of 2. In any of those cases, you can pick multiple rooms and kind of put 2 people in one and 1 in another, or you can kind of split it up that way during the process if you needed to. Unfortunately, we just can't guarantee that there would always be the exact number of spaces for every group that requests. We do guarantee the spaces for everyone, but that could happen during the process. Now, what I would say is that if your student and their roommate are not able to pick a room together, go ahead and get a room, get a space, but contact our office in that case. Let us know that you have your student email us, let us know, hey, I didn't get with my roommate. Can you help me? We do work the very best we can over the summer to try to do room changes in those kinds of cases where the roommate group had to be split up. Again, we have lots of movement during the summer, and so we do try to help out with that as best we can. Also, students are able to do self changes. I didn't mention that during the earlier in the presentation, but students are able to make self room changes during the summer and in the late spring. So if your student does pick a room, they kind of like that room, they're not real crazy about it, they kind of wanted a different building, they're able to keep logging back in to see what other spaces may become available. Because again, there's lots of movement going on. So they may log back in, a week later, and there's another space available that they really wanted in that building, whatever it might have been. So that is an option as well. So I like to make sure to point that out, that if you just didn't get what you wanted right away, you can keep going back and checking, and maybe some other spaces will have popped open. Also, the one last piece that you will see on our website that I didn't share in the presentation was the single request list. And that will open up typically about maybe the last week of April. Once that general room selection is complete, we then do open up the single room request list that anyone who's interested in a single room could go in and sign that wait list. And then we do work to do as best we can to get as many of those as we can into single rooms. Now, it is important that we have the wait list for this because we do have a limited number of singles, and it's very important. We have to hold a good number of those singles for medical accommodations. And so we hold those because those medical and disability accommodations are coming in during the summer and spring months. So we have to hold a good number of those for that. But then as the time's going on, we begin to determine if we're able to begin releasing some of those because we didn't need as many as we held for disability. And then we can start offering those to the wait list. So that will be available there in late April, all on the same website as well. A question about if you don't have a chosen roommate, is there a process to get matched? We don't specifically have one for returning students. If your student doesn't have a particular roommate and they're doing their room selection and they're kind of seeing what rooms they might want to pick, they can see who is currently assigned to that room. So if they find a room that has one person in it already, the system will tell them who that person is. So if they wanted to reach out and contact them, they could do that. There is a question here about if placed in a double room and nobody takes the second space, how much is the buyout? We do allow students to pay for the room. We call it a double as a single, and we charge the single price. If they want to basically keep that room to themselves and guarantee it as a single without a roommate, they pay the single room price. That's not something we're able to approve typically until a few weeks after move-in is when that occurs. And that's just because during the spring and summer, we're not yet completely sure what our final numbers are going to look like. And so we can't guarantee a space like that to be held offline, because we basically lose a bed when we do that. So that's something that we evaluate once the school year begins, and we decide if we can allow some students to have that kind of that guarantee of the room to themselves.
And there's a question here about the Engineering Computing LLC. So what I'll say is if you search that, you're not going to find it. So it is the Socially Engaged Engineering and Computing, SEEC for short, and that is open to second year engineering students. Right now they are, so Nick Stafford is our stakeholder with that community in engineering, and he is launching his recruitment cycle now. So that is a great contact for your student if you want to pass that on. So Nick, he's one of the academic advisors in the College of Engineering and Computing. But you can also go to our website if you type in community options and then Miami OH, you'll find the whole list of LLCs, and then you can click on the Socially Engaged Engineering Computing LLC, and that'll take you just a description and next contact information.
Okay, we've got a question about if students can check and compare and kind of take a look at rooms before the process starts. And we don't have anything on our housing website about that, but we do have Joe in his office, I think, has the Pinterest website that has lots of photos of rooms and buildings that students and parents have uploaded over the years. So that's a great resource to check out. I know it's on Pinterest. I'm not sure, Joe, if I'm forgetting if there's anything else we've got, but I know that exists. The other thing is that when your student would be going in to actually select their rooms, the system will give them information about that room as far as they can see, what the square footage or what the dimensions of the room are. So that is information that's available within the process.
Thank you. Right. Yes, I'm gonna put a link to the chat in the chat. If you go to Pinterest.com and search for Parent and Family Programs, Miami University, we have a collection of rooms, students submitted, sometimes family submitted, that we collect. There's a form that you can, if you're really proud of your student's room, you want to submit an image, there's a form off the parent website that you can put in there. Here, I will share so you can see this.
Thanks, Joe.
I'm going to stop your sharing for just
Okay.
a moment, if I can find the right one. So here's what it looks like, and you can find your rooms when you, let's see, you should be able to poke around in here, and there is a way, there's assortment of it. I'm not familiar with Pinterest enough from this end of it, but there is, if you're following us off our boards, we have there you're off the saved. We have a collection, so you can go to Presidents / Markham, and you can poke around and see the rooms. Oh, some of these rooms were taken while the buildings were empty, and some of them are not. We don't have every single room, but it is a place where you can do some poking around to get a look at what some of the rooms might look like, and some ideas of how you might want to decorate. So with that, I have not seen any more questions come up, and nothing new in the chat. So I think we can stop there. I want to take a moment and say thank you both to both Brian and Sarah for taking the time to help share this. I think this is great information for families thinking about. This is one of those processes. It's important for your students to have the information, have a plan, be prepared, and then also be ready for the whole plan to go sideways, because you're trying to match up with 2 to 4 other young adults who are figuring out their way in college, and things change a lot. So having this information is really valuable, but talking to your parents, or as you parents and family members talking to your students about being prepared, having a good plan, and then also being ready to change gears and change directions as opportunities arise. And so this hopefully will help you all do that. We'll have this up on the website within the next week, so that if you want to share it, we'll post it up on social media for anyone. If you want to share it out to other parents and family members or friends that you didn't get a chance to see this, you can share it with them. So thank you, Brian and Sarah, for taking time out of your busy weeks to help us with this. And I hope you have a great day. Parents and families, hope you have a great day. Good luck in your housing selection.
Great.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.